And hello, everyone, and welcome to Rich Sports Talk. Thank you so much for joining us here this evening. So much to talk about, and guys, always appreciate the love. We go into the poll I had on Rich Sports Talk that you responded to in droves. A lot to talk about the New York Jets. The 53-man roster is set for the 2022 season. And yes, I know this is a few days afterwards, but I wanted to wait till the dust settled, till pretty much the majority of the waiver claims was over, to give my thoughts, give my opinions on the Jets roster. And man, let's just say my guesses were slightly off for some of the big roster cuts, and there's so much to talk about. We'll get into the biggest surprises, some of the biggest waiver moves, of course, who's on the Jets practice squad. But let's start with one of the biggest headlines about the New York Jets right now, and of course, the way this roster is constructed. And before we begin, guys, thank you so much for joining us here on Rich Sports Talk. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. If you're new to the channel, if you're joining us after the live stream, make sure to comment so we can get to your questions the next time we do a video. But there's so much to dive into. I will get to the poll that you guys did on Rich Sports Talk, the YouTube page. And again, guys, thank you so much for doing that. But let's get into it. And the first biggest surprise, really, for the New York Jets was Denzel Mims is still on the roster. Now, I think that this was a bit of a surprise. The longer this went on, the more I felt that Denzel Mims would be starting. Of course, Mims was in the locker room the other day, interviewed by reporters. He vented his frustrations, feels he should be a starter, and basically quotes saying that the Jets don't see him as a starter because of the moves that they've made. And of course, Joe Douglas and this coaching staff says they still love Mims. They still love him as a receiver. They still say that they love him as a kid. And the biggest misconception that a lot of people are having is that Denzel Mims hates the Jets. That's not the issue. The issue is Denzel Mims doesn't see a path to him getting significant playing time with the Jets. And we're talking about a player that's now entering another year in his career, his third season. I mean, this is really the year where players start negotiating their new contract, especially being a second-round pick, only having one more year on his contract after this year. And really, when you are looking at the wide receiver market exploding right now, if you're a young wide receiver, Denzel Mims is saying, I not only have to put together a good season, but I also have to now put together 2 consecutive good seasons to prove that the first 2 years weren't my fault. It was more of a system fit. Like, Denzel Mims and his agent are not idiots. They understand that this is right now the hottest market for wide receivers. And Denzel Mims, you probably only get two, probably maybe 3, but usually just 2 opportunities to get paid a massive contract in the NFL. And in order to do that, and for teams to invest in Mims, he has to put out the track record and really have 2 consistent years, especially after having only 400 plus yards and no touchdowns through his first 2 games. But the biggest thing I took from this, and Connor Hughes was on this, and he tweeted about this the other day, and this was, I thought, very important. From Connor Hughes, the Vikings, Cowboys, Seahawks, along with the Panthers, called the Jets about trading for Denzel Mims. Sources tell SNY. The Jets' asking price was a 4th-round pick. The Jets did not get a 4th-round offer and decided it was in their best interest to keep Mims. And look, a 4th-rounder is a bit high. I thought a 5th would have made sense, but the Jets clearly still value Denzel Mims. Because if the Jets proved that they value Mims and they think Mims can still work and that Mims can still be a very good player for this team and could have an impact on this team. And the way I envision them looking at this situation is, if Corey Davis gets hurt, Mims is probably the best fit for replacing Corey Davis on the outside. Now, Mims doesn't really fit in the slot receiver role, but he does fit that big outside target. And if Davis gets hurt, and we saw Davis get hurt last year, Mims could get significant playing time potentially down the stretch. And look, they like Mims. They like what Mims has done. But Joe Douglas, like I've been saying, he's not going to trade Mims just to simply trade Mims. He's going to keep Mims on this roster because they have value in Denzel Mims. They believe Denzel Mims can still be a very good NFL player. And while they don't value him as high as an Elijah Moore or Garrett Wilson, they still value him being on this team. And I give Joe Douglas a lot of credit because, yes, this is not a great situation right now for Denzel Mims, but what's best for the Jets is keeping a player that could potentially be a nice piece down the stretch or a player that could be a significant fill-in role. Because the worst case scenario is if the Jets just traded away Mims for like a 6th-rounder pick just to get rid of him, and in 3 or 4 weeks, if there's 2 receiver injuries, Joe Douglas would be crucified in the New York media for letting go of Denzel Mims. So a 4th is a bit high. I thought to get to a 4th, the Jets might have to kick in a 7th. But it does show you that despite the lack of playing time, and the other thing I always say about players is it's not just your organization. How do other teams value you? And the fact that you had 4 teams calling about Mims, including his former coach with the Panthers, the Seahawks, and the surprising thing, 2 of those teams already have a great 1-2 punch, the Seahawks and the Vikings with their wide receivers, Cowboys as well. But the interesting thing, too, is the Jets have put a price out there, a 4th-round pick. In 2 or 3 weeks, if the Cowboys lose another receiver, if it's off to a slow start in Carolina, does the team get desperate and pull the trigger for Denzel Mims? So having him on this roster, not just giving away, the Jets still looking for value. And look, that 4th-round pick seems to be that sweet spot. We saw the Jets swap Chris Herndon for a 4th-round pick in years past. And again, guys, comment section's open. Would love to hear your thoughts about the Jets roster. What surprise cuts did you think the Jets had? And if you haven't, go to our poll in the community page, check that out, and put down who you think the Jets' most surprising cut was. Your reactions to the Jets roster, how it was constructed, how they did in the waiver wire period, all of that, put it in the chat. We will get to your questions in a bit. So Mims still on the roster. The Jets have pretty much their practice squad in place, but an interesting fact about the New York Jets, which could be interpreted a couple different ways, was the Jets had the most players claimed off of waivers. Now, pessimistic people will say, well, the Jets didn't put the right people on waivers and lost some valuable young pieces. The way I look at it is I have to give Joe Douglas credit for building a roster and putting players on this team that people want. I mean, seriously, Jet fans, when was the last time the New York Jets had players that were coveted by other people? When did they have multiple people that were coveted by other teams? And that just shows the fact of how well the Jets have drafted, done in free agency, and built this roster where they have very good depth now. So I was very pleased by that. So let's get into the 7 waiver claims, and then that leads us into the surprising cuts. The Jets, of course, 7 players claimed off of the waivers. Jason Pinnock has now gone to the Giants. Chuma Edoga has gone to the Falcons. Isaiah Dunn to the Seahawks. Rashad Wildgoose, the Commanders. Javelin Guidry, the Cardinals. Delshon Phillips, the Ravens. And Trevon Wesco, the Bears. So let's get into this roster, and I'll kind of go by position to some of the surprises. And you guys were great in the poll. I gave you 4 players. Who was the most surprising cut that the Jets made? And not surprisingly, overwhelmingly, you guys picked Jason Pinnock, 75%, Tevin Coleman, 22%, Chuma Edoga, and Bradley Anae, 1%. Of course, Anae on the practice squad. We will get to the practice squad in a little bit. But when I did this list, I will say the biggest surprise was definitely Pinnock. Because Pinnock was a draft pick last year this team valued highly. This was a player that they converted to safety. And this was a player that I thought would simply make the roster because of the versatility he brought in playing both the corner position and the safety position. Now, the more film I have watched of Tony Adams, who is a great story, the undrafted safety who the Jets have brought in, and I'll get to the more of the Jets safety position on the practice squad in a little bit, that Tony Adams does look like a very impressive candidate. But when you hear all of camp that the Jets, how good Pinnock is, that they view him as a potential starter in this league, and how aggressive teams were to get him in the waiver wire, it is very interesting that they let him go. Now, I did say there's always surprises for every single team. For the Jets, there were a couple, but to me, Pinnock was the biggest one because this was someone that was basically almost being held as a key safety piece, not only this season, but a potential long-term starter down the road. And Joe Douglas was asked about that and was a bit surprised and did say in the press conference that he was surprised that Pinnock was this sought out after on the waiver wire. And this is the game you play at this time of year with the waiver wire, which is there are players that you have to cut because you have to get down to 53. And in the last episode, I really stressed the importance of trying to find players that you can cut that you feel can slip through to the practice squad. The Jets felt Pinnock could slip through to the practice squad. I think that of all the players I just mentioned, that was probably the gravest oversight because you're talking about a player that has the potential to play safety, to play corner, multiple roles. And it is interesting, too, because you see him picked up by the Giants. The Giants obviously like what they saw in the joint practices. We know about their issues. And while I do spin this in a positive way, the Jets actually have players that people freaking want now, it does suck. But the one thing I will say about most of these players that are on this list, and I'll get to the 7 that were claimed off the waivers, why I think the Jets let them go and why they are in this situation. We have to remember that these aren't starting players right now. Like, we're talking about role players at best on this team this year. So I do think we have to preface that by saying, hey, look, I get Pinnock could be a very good player. And a lot of this is potential, the P word. We always talk about the potential, the upside, but we don't know how great they're going to be. If Tony Adams comes out and looks great, Jets fans will not talk about it. But there are some interesting moves, especially by this front office, that there's going to be a lot of pressure. And they even said they need to be playing competitive footballs in December. If Adams and Davis struggle, and we'll get to them in a minute, later on this season, and we see Jason Pinnock not even being a great safety, but being a valuable piece of a Giants defense, then we will question the moves. And to me, the biggest surprise after Pinnock was Chuma Edoga. And look, I don't think Edoga is a great tackle by any stretch. But I was talking to Lejay Duzable before he did a show, I'm Athlete, and we were talking extensively because we have a good relationship, and he knows I'm a big Jet fan, and we were talking together, and we were talking about this discussion, said, well, of all the players, who do you think would be the biggest surprise, and who were you most disappointed? He said Chuma Edoga. And here's his reasoning, and I actually agree with it. I really like Max Mitchell as a prospect. I think Max Mitchell was a very good pick, and I do like the upside and the potential that he has. The problem I have right now is that, look, Edoga by any stretch of the imagination is not a great tackle, but at least I feel better about him as a backup tackle than Connor McDermott. And for some reason, this Jet organization, and I think part of the reason McDermott's only here is because they can sneak him on the IR list for the short term. I do not get why McDermott got preference over Edoga. And it shows because a part of me in the last episode was going on saying maybe Edoga is someone that could slip through to the practice squad. But the more I thought about it, so many teams are desperate for tackles, and you've seen the Falcons, they've already picked him up, that the Jets are in a major issue. Like, if Mitchell doesn't have to come in and play to like week 8 or 9, maybe that won't be the biggest deal because he'll have like 2 months of practice and working with the system, but he's a developmental tackle. And the fact that you might now are one injury away from having a Max Mitchell protecting Zach Wilson is a scary thought. So I was a little bit surprised when Edoga was released, they didn't go out on the waiver wire and pick up another tackle. Look, they must be really high on Max Mitchell. There's a couple players that made this roster where you feel like they are very high on, and you do like the upside. But if it doesn't work out this year, that is going to be a major hindrance on this team. And to me, that was one of the things with Edoga. And again, guys, Chad's open and live me. Man, Rich, let's get into it. We lost a lot of good players. Chat's open. I'd love to hear from you guys. Your thoughts. A couple other surprises was the corners. Isaiah Dunn went to the Seahawks. Rashad Wildgoose, I thought could make it to the practice squad. He was picked up by the Commanders. And Gavilan Guidry. Now, Guidry was someone I thought was a stretch for the roster, but the second he hit waivers, him and Dunn, it was a risk that they were both out there. Both were picked up. Delshon Phillips was on the roster a lot last year, was picked up by the Ravens, and Trevon Wesco picked up by the Bears. Now, Wesco's been a bit of an intriguing player where a lot of the beat reporters didn't get the Jets cutting Wesco. And to an extent, I didn't either, because let me preface the following, which is, if you watched my last episode, I said, if I'm the Jets, I keep Lawrence Cager in the hopes of maybe trading Mims and then having Cager as a hybrid tight end wide receiver role player. When the Jets decided to carry 6 receivers, I was surprised that they kept him. And when I mean keep him, I thought he was someone that could maybe pass through the waiver wires. But again, you wonder what the Jets' intel was on who could clear the waivers. So the Jets made the decision to keep him. Now, I'm not a big fan of Wesco, but what Wesco could bring is a blocking tight end and someone that could play fullback. Right now on this roster, they don't really have anyone that can play fullback, so I'm interested to see if they use a fullback. Maybe they put like Ruckert in the backfield. I'm not sure how they're going to use a fullback, but that was a bit of a surprise to me as well in terms of this roster. Now, Tony, there's a lot to get into. So we talked about Denzel Mims. We can get into that a little bit more. We're talking about the surprising cuts for this Jet team that they've made. And we will get into the practice squad a bit. But to me, the biggest ones were Pinnock and Adoga. Adoga, it doesn't make sense to me when you need a backup tackle. Another surprise was some players that made this team. And I know one player in particular that me and a lot of Jets fans are surprised make the team, and I will get to him in a second, guys. Don't you worry. An interesting player that made the team, in my opinion, was Nathan Shepard. Now, Shepard was a surprise to me because I felt Marshall was going to be on the 53. I thought Marshall had a better camp than Shepard, and Shepard was the last basically of McCagnon's draft picks. Now, I think they kept Shepard because he might be a little bit better of a run defender than Marshall, and maybe the Jets thought that they could keep Marshall on the practice squad, which they are able to, and he's on the practice squad, so at least that worked out well for them. The biggest surprise of the entire cut season, and I am dying because I know the second I mention his name, the chat is probably going to blow up a bit. I am shocked that Ashton Davis is still a member of the New York Jets. And of all the selections, I think this was the most shocking because while Tony Adams was a bit of a surprise, the way the team talked about him, the way he contributed on special teams, and the athleticism that he brought during the preseason made some sense. And this, to me, is also another reason why I believe a lot of Jet fans really freaked out about the Jason Pinnock release, is that Ashton Davis is on this team. And I don't want to speculate, but if you had to ask my 2 cents of it, because Salah was asked about this, and Salah said, well, we wanted to keep Ashton Davis because of the impact he has on special teams. And yes, Ashton Davis does play a lot of special teams. But if you were to ask me, this just felt like a move that was done not to create a headline. Because I don't think many Jet fans would care about the headline, but we all know the 2020 draft class for the Jets has been a disaster, especially the first 2 days. Now, day 3 has produced some decent players. Man, there's a lot to prove, but let's see what Man can do as a punter. Bryce Hall has proven that he is a starting caliber corner despite the struggles in training camp. And I consider Bryce Huff a member of this draft class despite being undrafted because he's been with this class and he has made a great impact, especially in the pass rush. But we're looking at this draft class at the first 3 picks. Mekhi Becton injured again, out for the year, although the procedure reportedly has gone well. You have Denzel Mims, who looks like he's going to be the 5th receiver on your depth chart and is requested a trade. Then we get to Ashton Davis. And I have been a huge Ashton Davis defender throughout this offseason, saying, look, we got to give Ashton Davis a chance. He hasn't had a full offseason yet. He hasn't had a full offseason in this system coming back from the injury last year. Let's see what he can do at camp and then give the judgment at the end of camp. And I've given that judgment now. Ashton Davis did not deserve to be on this football team. And I understand that there could have been a cut made to basically, there was maybe a cap hit with this decision. There probably would have been some blowback about, of course, the Jets having another bad draft. But here's the problem I have. The Jets got a little bit lucky because Will Parks is a player I really like on this Jets practice squad. They were able to keep him. Now, will they be able to keep him long term? We will see with the injuries this year. But that does soften the blow. But it was funny because Tony Adams really wasn't on my radar to make this team. And I don't have a problem with him making this team. But when I looked at this depth chart and I went, Jason Pinnock deserved to make this team. Elijah Riley was a bit of a project, so I could understand why. I felt Will Parks deserved to make this team. Tony Adams, going back and watch the film, you could make the case deserved to make this team. But of all those guys, Ashton Davis felt like he was the 6th guy on that list. And I understand that draft picks get more opportunity, and higher draft picks always get more opportunity because they have obviously athleticism. They have traits and tools that made them where they were drafted. That I can understand. And I would love to hear from you guys in the comments. Let me know what you have to think. But for me, I was really disappointed with this decision because most of the moves from this Jet team, I will give them credit that they are moves where you're saying, okay, they're trying to win. They're trying to get the best people on this roster. Of all the moves, though, this one felt like I don't know if it was pressure from the front office. I don't know if they were just worried about the blowback, but Ashton Davis had about as quiet of a camp as you could have. Now, in some regards, when you're a member of the secondary, you want to have a quiet camp because you don't want to get the postings about you getting burned in practice, getting beat in practice. But Ashton Davis, I just remember watching the games, like Will Parks stood out in a couple games. Pinnock stood out in a couple games. Even Adams, after going back through the film more meticulously, I can see the coverage that he has and the versatility. Like Pinnock, they're going to use him as a hybrid corner. They can move him around the field, and I'm okay with that. But Davis, it was just quiet. And for me, I saw this move made, of all the moves, I was like, okay, I can maybe see the upside of this player versus this player. I can maybe see the fit compared to this player. Of all the moves the Jets made in the cutdown period, this was the one where I'm like, okay, this move felt like political. It wasn't a move to get the best player on the team. It wasn't a move to get the best person for the position. It was, Davis is the 3rd round pick. Let's see if we can try to make this salvageable. That's how it came off to me. Now, I'd love to hear from you guys in the chat. Is that how you feel about this move? Am I wrong for saying this? Am I out of my league for saying this? I really don't believe so. I just think that this is a situation where, it just seems to me like this was a move that the Jets made just to save face. And my argument to that is it really saving face if in 4 or 5 weeks, Ashton Davis is getting beat in coverage, looks lost out there, and then we're seeing Jason Pinnock making plays for the Giants, or at least proving that he should be on the field or a member of a 53 roster. That, to me, could be a major issue because this team is in a win-now mode, and it feels like if this team, all the positions And a lot of these decisions were win now decisions, but this did not feel like one of them, in my humble opinion. Because I look at Ashton Davis. I actually feel the Jets would have gotten more credit for cutting Ashton Davis because it would prove to them that they realized this was a mistake and they would have owned up to the mistake. And I keep saying, and I understand general managers have attachments and general managers want to make sure their high picks work and that their higher profile picks work because it looks better for them. But I've also believed, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but my opinion is I'd rather have a general manager admit they made a mistake and move off of a mistake early than continually try to make something work that isn't working. And the funny thing is the Jets, I don't think it would have even made a headline. Think about the Raiders, cutting Alex Leatherwood a first-round pick. Think about how many teams went through this process and cut third-round picks. Heck, the Jets picked up a third-round pick from last year's draft, and he's now on their practice squad in Chaz Surratt from the Vikings. They made that cut. Why? They got a new coaching staff, and he doesn't fit the scheme there. So the Jets cutting a third-round pick, yeah, it would not help their long draft history. And okay, it'll be maybe a talking point on New York radio for 20 minutes. But like even the Giants cut Blake Martinez today. That was a bigger surprise. Like I thought Blake Martinez was going to be a big part of that Giants defense. Well, no, he's not. Like even Ashton Davis, like the best thing he was going to do for this defense was be a decent rotational piece. It was at best be a decent rotational player. We weren't expecting him to start. I don't think anyone was expecting him to start. I don't think anyone was expecting him to make a big impact in the secondary. So when I see all this talk about the Jets made a mistake with Pinnock, and it's for me, it's not that they released Pinnock, it's they kept Ashton Davis over Pinnock. And now he's on a different team. But that does bring us to the practice squad because while this is a game, the Jets did lose a couple of players. They did get a couple of good players back. Chris Strevler was able to return the Jets practice squad. Tariq Black, Irvin Charles, the receivers. Chris Glazer, Grant Hermans, the tackles. Now, the big one for me was Bradley Anae because I really liked Anae in the preseason. I thought he was a very good pass record. That, to me, after Pinnock was probably the biggest shock because of the way he was rushing the passer and the way he contributed on special teams being a former 49er. So the fact that the Jets have him on the practice squad is great. I don't love the Curry move. I think they're going to put him on IR. Maybe Anae can sneak onto this roster later in the season. But that was a big move. Jonathan Marshall, of course, returning. Tandil Smart. Look, personally, I think Marshall or Smart should have gotten the nod over Shepard. That's just me personally. Nasruddin, DQ Thomas, for the linebackers. And, of course, they've added more help today. Craig James, the former Eagle. They've added Chaz Surratt, a third-round pick. And he's someone I would really keep an eye on because drafted by the Vikings changing up the defense. This is a very athletic linebacker and could be an interesting project for the Jets where maybe when we come into camp, we have him. We have Sherwood next year competing for the linebacker role. So that could be a guy to keep an eye on. And maybe later in the year, if there's some linebacking injuries, maybe he's a plug-and-play player later. And Will Parks. I'm happy that they brought Parks back. I think Parks has proven to be a good fill-in piece. If you ask me, I think Parks should be above basically where Ashton Davis is. But that's just me personally. Now, I'd love to hear from you guys. Again, thank you for doing the poll. 75% Jason Pinnock. Tevin Coleman, 22%. Surprised. And let me get to Coleman, I guess, for a brief tangent. And again, guys, chat's open. Would love to hear what you guys think about the Jets cutdown day, the moves that they made, the moves they didn't make. Who do you think was a mistake cutting? Would love to hear from you guys. So make sure you put in the chat. And of course, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Give us a follow on Rich Sports Talk on social media. And of course, let us know what you would like to talk about in terms of the New York Jets. And Coleman was a bit of a surprise to me initially, but then when I really thought about it, the fact that they're keeping two younger running backs and Zonovan Knight. Like, if you had to ask me, if you had to keep Knight or Coleman, who would you keep? I would keep Knight because, yes, it's great to have a veteran running back presence in there. But if you feel that Hall and Carter are good enough in the blitz pickup, if you feel that they're good enough in pass protection, I'd take a swing on the running back position. Take a swing on a guy that's a bit younger, that's shown some explosiveness in camp, that's shown the ability to make plays, and someone that's really adds a dimension to this roster. And look, he's not a pure power back, but Knight can run with some pop. He can run a bit in between the tackles. He kind of gives the Jets a third down running back if they need to really get a short yard situation. Coleman didn't really fit where you look. Carter's really become what Coleman's role would be on this team, the number 2 back, decent pass catcher out of the backfield. And I just really like Knight. I thought Knight had a great camp. And he's someone that, for me, and this was part of this game, is I thought if you put Knight on waivers, he'd be claimed quickly. And getting into the waiver claim, too, one of the other intriguing factors was the Jets had the 4th selection in the waiver claim system. And Douglas was asked about why they didn't claim anyone. He said he liked the roster, but the interesting thing he said was they had maybe 2 or 3 players that they were interested in, but they felt they wouldn't get past the top 3 picks. And it's who knows who those players are, but that's what Douglas said. So Jets have their roster. No update on Zach Wilson. We know Sauce Gardner will be starting week 1 at corner over Bryce Hall. I'm really intrigued to see what happens. And even for week 1, I do think the Jets have a shot, and I do think the Ravens are a better team. But I am curious to see what happens with Baltimore with this contract situation with Lamar, because that's still hanging over. Another quarterback got paid today in Russell Wilson. Getting the bag, the second highest contract, I think, annually now after Aaron Rodgers. So Russell Wilson gets a nice payday. And, good for him, good for the Broncos organization. But, again, I'm a little surprised. You guys are a little bit quiet in the chat tonight, usually a little bit more. I'd love to hear from you guys. Let me know what you think. Would love to hear your opinions tonight on this situation, on what the Jets, I guess, did and didn't do. So again, would love to hear from you guys about what you think how the Jets did at the waiver wire position. Who was the player? Of course, to your poll, you guys were saying the biggest surprise was Pinnock, and to me that was too. I guess almost I should have rephrased it. After Pinnock, who was the most surprising cut? I think it would have been a more diversified poll. So I think that would have been interesting. But we're getting close to it. We will, of course, do a preview of week 1 next week, and we will bring you more breaking news at the Jets before, if there's an update on Zach Wilson, on all the latest news. But love having you guys back. Really excited to get the season going. And look, I didn't think it was a bad waiver period for the Jets. It was intriguing. I do think that they did surprise us with some of the moves they made. Pinnock won, keeping Ashton Davis. Nathan Shepard was another surprise. For me, I think the Pinnock frustration is just over Ashton. I think Jet fans are done with Ashton Davis. I think that if not all Jet fans, the majority of Jet fans have basically made the decision to move off of Ashton Davis. They've decided to punt on him, and not only just him. I think it's just this fan base is just so frustrated with that whole 2020 draft. I just think like the fan base is just done. And it's almost unfair to some of the players in that draft class, but just I think the final straw for that draft class was when Becton got hurt. It just feels to me, and again, voice your opinions, tell me what you think. It feels like Jet fans had a slimmer of hope that the draft class could be salvageable. But when Becton was announced he was going to miss the year, I think pretty much every Jet fan just put it and said, look, this is just another bad draft that we're going to be known for. We've done better the last 2 years, but this is another wasted draft. Screw the 2020 draft. And they got some decent pieces out of it, but when we look back on it, the first 2 rounds especially, you have Becton hurt for the whole year. Mims could be off this roster with a trade, and then you have Ashton Davis, the 3rd-round pick, and for the majority of Jet fans, the feeling I got checking social media and the feedback I got from you was that you were not happy that Ashton Davis made this roster, which is not a good sign for your 3rd-round pick. Now, I am a little bit surprised, too, that the Jets did keep Davis. I didn't love the reasoning behind it. I don't think it's really great reasoning. And if you had to ask me what I think it's more of he's a 3rd-round pick, and we're doing this because he's a 3rd-round pick as opposed to what he brings this team on the field, which I don't like, personally. I really think you got it. And I get there's egos involved. There's money involved. Especially in this market, it's, oh, look, another wasted Jets draft pick, another wasted draft year. But look, the Jets did a really good job in adding a lot of depth. You're seeing teams now claiming people off the Jets roster, which used to never happen. It was basically, if you couldn't make the Jets, your NFL career was pretty much over. So the fact that they now have those type of players and that depth is really exciting, and I think great testament to what this front office and this organization has done. And look, it's a frustrating time too, especially after the preseason. The preseason's weird because we form these attachments also to players that in the grand scheme of things probably won't make a big impact on game day. I mean, Streveler became the big talking point, but he, look, at best was going to be this team's 3rd quarterback. You saw Pinnock become someone that the Jets fans, especially watching him at practice, really got hyped about. But at the best this year, you were hoping for a good rotational piece. I mean, Chuma Doga. I mean, we form these attachments, and I get we like these players. We see those players, especially in the preseason. We see them play a lot, and we see them playing against other teams. And look, the Jets, this goes to Denzel Mims too, where a lot of people were like, how could the Jets have not traded Denzel Mims? Well, they didn't get fair value for him. They wanted a 4th-round pick, and no team would give him a 4th-round pick. They still see some value. But one of the things I kept saying, too, is people are like, see, Denzel Mims proved he should be playing. He's playing with guys that didn't make the team, against guys that didn't make a team. So for everyone saying, oh, Mims should be playing, Mims should be playing, Mims should be playing. Should he? I mean, Wilson's looks pretty good. I mean, Elijah Moore. And it almost feels like, and I've said this, if Mims is playing, it's a nightmare scenario for the Jets. Because it means at least 2 of your best receivers have gotten hurt and are missing significant time. If Mims is starting, it means either Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, or Corey Davis and and Garrett Wilson, or Garrett Wilson and Elijah Moore are out, which is not a good situation for this team. So that was my thoughts on the cutdown day. Surprised with especially some of the offensive line moves. Good news is Zach Wilson tonight at a Jets dinner walking around, which is always a positive sign to see he's walking around. So hopefully that means he could be potentially ready to go for the first game of the season. The Jets, of course, have not given a timetable. They're taking it slow, which is the right decision. Do not rush him back into the fold. Finally, some questions, and I'm glad to see this. Randilla, we don't work with the players every day, so what do we know? We have to trust the coaches. And I get that part of it too, Randilla. That's one of the reasons I think you saw Adams make this roster. And it's really, this is the tricky part, is constructing the roster, because you have to figure, especially with the guys 44 through 53, who's doing special teams, what roles, what packages do they work in. There's a lot that goes into it. I think Hard Knocks did a great example with the lines. You keep seeing them okay, well, if we move this piece, but then we lose 2 spots here, okay, are they definitely good? They're good enough to make it, but we don't know if they fit this role. So that does go into it. I bet releasing Pinnock was a lively debate. Surprisingly, Spin Max Dave, not a lot of comments in here about that, but it was interesting that on the poll I did on the page, we did do a vote, and 75% said that was the most surprising cut. I should have probably, in retrospect, did besides Pinnock, who was the most surprising cut. And really, I think the biggest surprise was just because of how basically Ashton Davis is. Like, I don't even give him a word right now. Like, he's basically he's a sound effect right now with his performance, and how much this coaching staff, the beat writers, and everyone built him up, how good Pinnock's working. Well, like when they're saying they could see him as a future starter on this team, despite never playing safety and converting to that position, I'm like, he's making this team. And on top of that, my thought process was, well, if you carry Pinnock, that means you can maybe carry one less corner. For a team that's trying to get linemen on this team, that's trying to keep as many D linemen on this team, that sounds like a smart idea. But the Jets have to start winning, absolutely. And you heard it in the press conference from Douglas and from Sal, like they need to be playing meaningful games this year. But they know this. They understand this. And it always comes down to the roster moves. Like if this team is winning, no one's going to question. Like if this team, even if this team doesn't have a winning record, but they're competitive and the first 9 games are tough, but this team somehow comes out 4-5, maybe even 3-6, and they're playing meaningful games and are getting on a stretch run in November, December, we're not going to be talking about what they did in August. We're not going to be talking about them cutting Jason Pinnock or these guys in August. I mean, we are so obsessed and optimistic with football, and especially for the Jets, like you're seeing players get taken, like, well, why are we getting rid of these guys when other teams want them? And look, I can understand that fear, but this is also part of the job with coaching. There's a lot of good players in the NFL. And that's why you see like the XFL and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, advertising 54, like the 54th man on the roster. It's hard to find great in the NFL, like special, but there's a lot of good. And I think Dan Campbell, just because I was watching Hard Knocks, said it best. When you're looking at the last guys for the roster, you have either column A or column B. Column A is the guys that absolutely work their ass off. They're grinders. You can tell that they come in, they're prepared, they're smart, they understand the system, they're ready to go every single freaking day. But they just don't have that skill set. And then you get the guys that have that talent, that flashes, that brief play, like, whoa, that's a little different. That's a little something. But they don't put it together consistently. And one of the biggest things about Adams was that they loved the ability that he brought. And I did love how they've been lining him up, especially in the preseason, as like a hybrid corner. I almost think they could use him as like a hybrid linebacker. And I know it's gone around too, where the Zoom question where they asked him what he wanted to do in the NFL, and he basically said he wanted to take someone's job. Well, he certainly did that. Which I love the swagger that guys have. And look, Adams, I think every Jets fan is praying Adams selects 33. So if they still have a Jamal Adams jersey in the closet, you don't have to throw it away. That like everyone's hoping like Adams just selects 33, so they'll have another 33 Adams to wear. But look, I think this Jet roster, it's a testament to what Joe Douglas has done. And I know a lot of you don't love Joe Douglas. I know a lot of you get on me for being a big Joe Douglas supporter, but you never had really you never had the McCagnon, you never had the Idzik, and even to an extent the Tambob. When the Jets cut someone, you rarely saw teams be this aggressive to go out there. And you're seeing the Jets losing players that other teams want. And that to me is a really good sign that they have built some good depth and they've put together some decent players on this NFL roster where you have guys that like, and I said this in the last episode, the problem for the last few years is the Jets, they didn't have 53 guys to fill out an NFL roster. They didn't have 53 NFL bodies. And what this is proving to me now is they have more than 53 bodies. They have more than 53 players that can play in the NFL. They have more than 53 players that teams want. And you see that the second they're on the waiver wire, they're getting picked up, and it's a fight to keep them on the practice squad. How often, like even 2 years ago, when you're looking at the Jets roster, you were looking at probably at least 5 to 10 guys that wouldn't make an NFL roster with any other team. Now you're looking at guys where the other teams are valuing. They're saying, look, we have 53, but we think your guy is better than number 51, 52. And look, I know it's not the biggest difference in the world. It's not going to be the biggest headline in the world, but as a Jet fan, it is exciting to see that this Jet team, which, let's be honest, for a decade has not been good at developing talent or finding talent, whether it be in the undrafted free agent market, whether it be in the secondary free agent market, whether it be in the draft. And now we're seeing, even more recently, 2 years, you're seeing pitting from the draft in 2021 have value picked up by the Giants. We're seeing guys who the Jets have developed, have brought in, have, run through their paces, and other teams are interested. I mean, there's a reason why 7 players are no longer on the Jets organization. And the Jets were trying, and look, I don't think the Jets wanted to give them away. The Jets were just trying to play the practice squad game, but it's a good testament. Like, the players that they are keeping look like NFL players. Yeah, maybe not Ashton Davis. I'm kidding. But you know what I'm saying. So I'm excited for the season to get going. And again, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate the time tonight. Remember, if you're new to the broadcast, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our content. If you're a Jet fan, we'll be here after every Jets game, breaking down the Jets, how they did in the game. Rams ran a 4.47. Look, I love the athleticism. And when I was doing the draft process, I actually had him valued as like a 4th-round pick. I was actually surprised, Randall, that he made it to the undrafted portion. Like, Zonovan Knight got a lot of the headlines just because, again, he played at a bigger school in the running back position. But Adams was a nice pick. Like, I remember looking at the undrafted. He was probably, after Knight, like the guy I was really most excited to see for the Jets. And look, he's got that versatility, that athleticism. And look, I know I'd beaten up on Ashton Davis, but the one thing you can say about at least the 2 Jet safeties is they have speed back there with Adams and with Ashton Davis. But look, you gotta give Tony Adams credit, and this is why you love the preseason. Someone that was an undrafted free agent that came in, made an impression, and made a 53-man roster. So that to me is really impressive. Well, we'll get to that when we do the Ravens preview next week. Spin Max Dave, I have a little bit of a surprising opinion. I mean, I don't think everything's as rosy in Ravenland as everyone thinks. Look, I know their biggest injuries days was their mascot went down for the year at the ACL, but I do think there's some intriguing things going on in Baltimore, and depending on how things go over the next couple of days, could make it a little bit more interesting if let's just say paper and ink don't mix with Lamar Jackson before the home opener. Now, some people might think it might be a bad thing because Jackson will be motivated maybe a little extra, but I take the other thing. I think it could be a distraction where, I mean, you keep telling people that he's your franchise quarterback, yet, the Browns, traded a guy with a track record and gave him a guaranteed contract. Kyler Murray won't spend time in the film room, and his team gives him a contract. And Russell Wilson has been in Denver for 3 months and hasn't played an official snap for the Broncos, and they just gave him a contract. And Lamar's been in Baltimore and is the ideal person. It does a lot for the community and is a grinder and a hard worker, and yet somehow he can't get paid. And oh, by the way, Baltimore let go of his best weapon to Arizona, and he doesn't have great. I mean, Rashad Bateman is the number 1 receiver in Baltimore right now. Look, I think they got one of the best tight ends in Mark Andrews, and he's going to be a handful for the Jets. But week 1, J.K. Dobbins not really looking like he's going to be there. The running game, again, looks a little bit suspect. So look, the Ravens got a good defense. Like that's no question about it. So we'll have to see. But I think it's going to be a closer game than people think. If you're expecting the Ravens just come in and blow out the Jets, I think the Jets are going to surprise a lot of people. But again, guys, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We'll be back with more Jets content, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you have any questions or join us after the live stream, make sure to post your comment, and we will get to that in the next video. But until next time, guys, I'm Nolan Rich, and this is Rich Sports Talk. Thank you so much for joining us.